Hello, everyone. In today's episode of the Title Answers podcast, we are going to discuss why the ego is the enemy. Now, The Ego is the Enemy is a title I got from a book I read recently by Ryan Holiday, where they discuss that when it comes to making decisions in your life, you need to be careful with your ego, because a lot of times that can help affect your decisions. And if you make all your decisions egocentric, you can basically put yourself in a predicament. And, he covers a lot of examples throughout history and time where individuals were more interested in satisfying their ego than they were in satisfying or resolving the issue at hand. How does this apply to real estate? It's very simple. When you're out there and you're transacting, you're going to have a lot of sub-negotiations in a transaction. So while the objective is to go out there and finalize a transaction for the purchase of a home, you're going to have a bunch of sub-negotiations aside from the price throughout the entire process. You're going to deal with your mortgage lender. You're going to deal with the seller. You're going to deal potentially with tenants that may be in the property. You're going to deal with your own realtor. You're going to deal with the realtor for the other side. There's a lot of conversations that happen in there. And if at any point in those negotiations, the parties invoke their ego and they want to prove, you know what, I'm the biggest, mightiest person in this transaction, things can become toxic very quickly. And in my experience, once you have a transaction where someone has played the ego card and we've moved to this realm of someone has made an attack on someone else, it becomes very difficult at that point to bring everybody in the transaction back. Have you ever had a fight with a significant other where you tell them, you know what, you're being crazy? It takes a long time for that conversation for your significant other to come back and say, you called me crazy, and we're going to talk about that. It's the same thing in a transaction. I can't tell you how many times in a transaction we will have the email thread where all the parties are involved and one item is being negotiated, and out of nowhere, someone puts an email, we're not going to give that to you, you're not getting what you want, you're being crazy. Guess what? Now everybody else in that transaction is on high alert, and if you don't have professionals involved, things can become very difficult for you. So the following are some tips that I think you should use when you're out there buying and selling real estate in order to prevent ego taking over the transaction. My first tip to avoid egos taking over a transaction: know your objective. What do I mean by that? You have to, throughout the transaction, have a plan of action and know what your objective is. If you're a family of 4 and you're trying to find your forever home for your wife and your 2 kids, then you need to go out there and keep that objective in the back of your mind. If you're going out there and you have, let's say, some extra money saved up and you want to buy an investment property and you've created a spreadsheet of your budget and your financials, then you go out there and you have all the metrics of what you're trying to achieve in the transaction. If you now get those same items and you apply it at the sub-level of the sub-negotiations, let's go to an example that happens very frequently. The seller is asked for a credit of anywhere from $500 to $800 to pay for the tent being placed on the property because there's a possibility of termites. If you go into that negotiation and that's what you're trying to achieve, then you go out there, make sure you know why is it needed, what evidence of termites was there in the inspection report that came back, and you go in there and you discuss that issue. Because what happens is when you go into that negotiation, when you go into that conversation, or when you fire off that one sentence email, you have an objective and you know what it is. But if you go into that email and let's say you're negotiating that termite inspection and you write, well, I want the credit for the $800 and you've been unreasonable throughout, you're driving me crazy. Those last 2 sentences or phrases, you're driving me crazy, you've been unreasonable throughout, while they may be true and while you may feel that way, how is that going to help you achieve your goal? What you're really doing in that situation is you're saying, I'm the reasonable one here. Why is no one listening to me? While you are the reasonable one, you need to understand that the way that's going to be perceived from the seller is completely different. One tip that I always tell people is when you know your objective, then you know what you're trying to achieve. But if you go out there and you're just erratically saying everything that comes out as a result of emotion, guess what ends up happening? Conversations can go 20 different ways and you have no way to come back to center. So when you go into any conversation throughout the transaction, just remember, what are you trying to achieve? And it becomes a lot easier to avoid egos taking over. My second tip for negotiating egos in transactions is try to incorporate others or bring in support materials that support your position, right? So what do I mean by this? Let's take the example of the termite inspection. If you're requesting a credit of $500 from the seller, you may want to bring the inspection report. You may want to bring in some additional photos, attach that all to your emails. So when you send that email that says, I'm hereby requesting the $500, show those pictures at the bottom. Don't just state it and state it as a matter of fact. Number two, another tip I suggest is if you think your request is not going to be met well, try to do it in a setting where it's face to face and you can have others around so you can have a conversation within a group. What do I mean by that? Go to the property, go visit it again. You come to the property under the termite inspection and you say, listen, we want to see for ourselves so you all can walk it together. Now it's you, it's your realtor, it's the seller's realtor and the seller, and you're all there. You're walking around the property and everybody's looking at this together and you're all having a conversation. Now, if you're having that conversation and you have the evidence, everybody is having a group dialogue and you can all look at the issue, address it together, and you have less chances of someone going completely out of whack, because guess what? It becomes a lot more difficult to have, that moment where you feel the need to act erratic when others are around, because now everyone else is watching it. But if you do it in isolation, one-to-one, guess what? There may be that moment in the conversation where things take a turn. And when that moment comes, usually if there's a group, if someone steps a little out of line, if you have, for example, your realtor there who's a professional and the conversation starts to take a turn, they're going to know that moment to say, hey, you know what? Let's talk about this later, or let's discuss this another way, or you know what, let's go outside for a second. And you can have those little moments and that buffer to avoid egos taking over and the conversation going toxic. My third tip for dealing with egos in real estate transactions is choose your method of delivery. What do I mean by that? We can communicate nowadays through so many different ways, and we have so much at our disposal. If you really think about it, less than 100 years ago, most people could either talk to each other or they could write each other a letter. Nowadays, when I'm dealing in a transaction, I get emails, I get texts, I get voicemails, I get Instagram messages, I get FedExes from clients. I get all sorts of communication, and it comes through so many different ways. So what does this mean? If you're going to have a conversation about an item that you're negotiating with the other party, you're going to have to decide how you want to have that conversation. If it's a big ticket item, chances are you're going to want to decide how do you want to deliver that message. Do you want to deliver it over email? By the way, a lot of times when words are spoken and how they come across, they can be read in a very negative fashion. So if you come at the seller and you say, I want a $15,000 credit for the termites that were discovered in the inspection report, you're going to have to choose how you deliver that, because if you send it by email, chances are they are going to flip out. And no one is going to be there, because that seller is going to be there alone reading that email, and they're going to be stewing and they're going to start going crazy and they're going to be like, what's going on? And guess what? That starts all building up in them. And you know what typically happens? They get on their keyboard and they write their little email of rage. Are you crazy? What are you doing? What do you mean? I've lived here my whole life. My children live here. How dare you say that there's termites in the property? That's something that realistically happens. So you need to choose how to deliver that message in such a way, because that's probably a conversation that you want to have in person. For example, in that situation, wouldn't it be better to probably schedule a second inspection, go to the property and say, listen, the inspection report was a little worrisome. We came out here, it's not just the termites, we're going to have to repair some beams. This is what they showed here. Let's walk it together and decide how you're going to deliver that message in such a way where you're going to get to your point. Because if you deliver that message in a very crude fashion, chances are they're going to respond in such a way that you may have egos take over. And once that happens, the conversation goes toxic. My fourth tip is know how to turn off the bomb. That's the only way I can describe it. As a title agent and an attorney, we are CC'd on, we have a bunch of transactions going on at a time. I'm CC'd on all these emails. I'm watching conversations go on all day long. Well, guess what ends up happening? A lot of times when that conversation starts to go south, starts to become toxic, as I've been saying, it's usually very readily ascertainable to everybody in the transaction. Guess what? When that happens, you need to know it's time to defuse this bomb and have everyone disengage. Because if at that point you decide to, for example, there's a fire, and add gasoline to it, things are only going to get worse. Now, if your objective is to blow up the whole transaction, that's okay. Maybe that is your objective. But most of the time, everybody's trying to just achieve a workout to a resolution. For example, recently I had a transaction. Sellers were very upset with the buyer. the buyers were taking a little bit long, right, with their financing. They had some issues come up. Seller's agent, probably got a little too aggressive in his email. And, I immediately read it and I thought, oh man, they're not very happy. But at that point, I thought the buyer side should just take the position, which, everyone typically does of, we're going to get this done. We're sorry about this. We had an issue, but, we're going to do everything that we can. All right. And listen, I understand that's a lot of empty words, but that's usually the best you can do in that situation without inflaming more. Well, guess what? That's not what the buyer's lender did. The buyer's lender got on the email chain and went, straight guns blazing, telling everybody nobody understands how difficult his job is and how hard it is to get it done, and they don't know him, and how dare they say that this is taking too long. They don't understand what's going on. Well, guess what? He just turned around, started shooting at everyone else, didn't diffuse the situation at all, and now I had World War III going on. Because the second I saw that email, guess what I did? I took my own advice and I started diffusing. I called the sellers and said, hey, I'm going to try to figure out what's going on. Don't worry, I got this. I'm going to figure it out for you. I called the buyer. I quite frankly told him, please stop emailing everybody because it's not helping at all. I understand you're doing your best. I understand your job is difficult, but like any professional, everyone's job is difficult. So please just do your job, get it done. I'll manage everything else. But like I said, the most important thing is when you see that bomb going off, try to figure out how to diffuse it and turn it off.